Castles dominated the medieval landscape, and Britain has some of the finest in the world. Today, most are decaying relics, many of their secrets buried in time. Now, historian Ruth Goodman and archaeologists Tom Pinfold and Peter Ginn are turning the clock back to relearn the secrets of the medieval castle builders.
This is the ultimate in medieval technology.
The origin of our castles is distinctly French, introduced to Britain at the time of the Norman conquest of 1066.
3, 2, 1, tirez!
Here in the Burgundy region of France is Guédelon Castle, the world's biggest archaeological experiment. A 25-year project to build a castle from scratch, using the same tools, techniques, and materials available in the 13th century.
It's a lot of hard work at the coalface, because this is industry.
For the next 6 months, Ruth, Peter, and Tom will experience the daily rigors of medieval construction.
Drop down.
Yeah.
Yep.
And everyday life.
Looking really good, you know.
How workers dressed and ate,
You can really smell your food, Ruth.
and the art of combat. This is the story of how to build a medieval castle. It's March. Tom, Ruth, and Peter have traveled to Saint-Fargeau, 100 miles south of Paris, where Guédelon Castle is being built. They're now 17 years into a 25-year project, and over the next few months, its most defining features, the towers, will take shape.
It's just something else.
really?
Look at those things up there.
Oh, my goodness.
Makes you dizzy.
The team are meeting members of Guédelon's workforce, Master Mason Florian Ranucci and Site Administrator Sarah Preston.
This is amazing.
Well, thank you so much for coming so far to see our castle in the making. I'd like to introduce you first of all to Florian. Florian is our master mason, so he's going to be guiding you throughout your stay here.
You oversee this entire project. That is amazing. That really is.
Well, it's really simple. I just have to know very well the castle.
But you're almost like the puppet master. You have the people working in the quarry, the people working as masons, the carpenters. You've got to control everyone.
Well, I prefer the image of a musical conductor. We have to be in the same time working. This is very important.
The rhythm
Find
of
a
work
rhythm.
with them.
Yeah, the rhythm. So it's like music.
Well, if you're the conductor and you've got the strings over there and the percussion over there and the timpani over there, I can play a triangle.
Building Guédelon is an enormous undertaking. It will require some 30,000 tons of stone that must be quarried, shaped, and lifted into position without modern machinery. There are also teams of woodcutters and carpenters constructing scaffolding, roofing, and doors. Blacksmiths making ironwork and tools, as well as tile makers and carters. In the 13th century, English workers crossed the Channel to hone their skills in France.
France is where architecture is happening. Castles, churches, we're looking at their built environment and thinking, wow, they're really good at that. And we're importing all those ideas into Britain.
As a military historian, you're very used to reading the theories behind how castles are made. But hopefully, as an experimental archaeologist, I can actually test some of those theories, put them into practice.
13th century life, there's a lot of questions surrounding it. There aren't that many records. So by the actual act of building this castle, it's almost like creating a window through which we can observe what 13th century life might have been like.
Building a medieval castle began with a wooden model.
So what is this model used for?
In medieval times, they don't have a paper plan.
Right.
So they used to have wood model.
Well, I guess this is a way of the Lord saying, this is what I want my castle to look like.
Yes, and the Lord, he can change things with the model. It's very easy for him.
So I suppose a medieval building sites, like you have here, you can easily have over 100 masons. They all can look at this and know the angles they need to be doing and the wall that they're working on.
Guédelon's design is typical of the 13th century. Many British castles, such as Harlech, Conway and Carnarvon, have a similar layout. Castles were not only for defense, they were a show of strength, a lord putting his stamp on the landscape. Inside the walls there were grand houses, with great halls, kitchens, and even chapels. A thick wall surrounded by a dry moat protects an inner courtyard, which itself is protected by 6 towers.
Wow, this is the Great Tower. This is what Florian wants us to work on.
When completed, the Great Tower will be almost 30 meters high, providing a lookout for approaching enemies. And with walls 4 meters thick, it's the castle's ultimate stronghold.
So if we were the wall,
If I stand here, I'm inside.
you're inside. That's 4.
I mean, that's massive.
It just brings home how many tens of thousands of tons of stone will be in this castle when it's finished.
Back then, the only way of transporting stone over land was using horse-drawn carts. Minimizing the distance it had to be moved was paramount. So, like many castles of the time, Guédelon is actually built in a quarry.
In the quarry, we have the sandstone, the primary building fabric. We also have the sand and the water. That can be used to make the mortar. We have ochre, which again can be used to making pigments. We're on a clay lens here, and the clay can be used for firing tiles, roof tiles, floor tiles, and we're surrounded by forest, which is a source of timber. It's a source of fuel, so it can keep the blacksmiths going. Almost everything we need to build a castle is just a stone's throw away.
The boys are put to work extracting blocks of sandstone under the watchful eye of a stonemason who's worked here for 16 years, Clément Girard.
The first job, le premier travail pour vous, c'est de faire des petits trous dans la pierre.
Make the small stone.
It's very difficult. You learn it.
Minute de travail.
Clément's teaching the boys how to cut huge stones from the quarry into usable building blocks, using just a hammer, a chisel, and a wedge.
I don't think I've got the skills to do this. I'll give it a go.
Pressure's on. I'm glad it's you and not me.
So making this hole to fit the wedge snugly. But obviously, Clément, with his years and years of experience, knows exactly how to orientate this. So the wedge goes into this one hole, you hit it, and that's going to cause a fracture in the already pre-existing sediment lines, and it'll split in half.
Clément, is he good?
Oui, c'est bientôt fini. Bonne musique. Good music.
Good music.
And now, sledgehammer.
Now a sledgehammer. Wow, you can just see the fracture starting to appear. This is not about brute force, it's about listening, it's about looking, precision engineering.
Listen. Good. Perfect.
I see this as a good omen, Tomo.
The hardness of the sandstone varies considerably, depending on its iron content. The more iron, the harder the stone. So the medieval mason had a system of grading it.
You've got 3 categories of stone here, the pith, the paff and the puff. You've got the pith, this sort of black, high iron content sandstone, and that's used for the major load-bearing parts of the castle. The path, this more reddish sandstone, and the soft one, the puff, sort of very yellowy, crumbly sandstone.
And it's almost like we're shopping for stone, really, isn't it? We're coming out here, we're looking at the colours, and we can actually get what we want for the particular task we're about to do.
These stones will form the main building blocks of the castle. Just as important as the stone were the workers. In the woods surrounding the castle, Ruth's setting up home.
Building a castle involves such a lot of people, and they've all got to live somewhere. So you get a sort of temporary community setting up at the edge of the building site as all these different people come and go with their various skills. And naturally, over time, that begins to become a bit more permanent, a village in the making. Indeed, many villages right across Europe, in Britain as well as in France, can actually trace their origin to being camps for workers on a building site.
This small hovel is typical of a worker's home on a medieval building site.
The workers' cottages somewhere like this were always going to be thrown up in a hurry and fairly sort of basic. But then so were those of most 13th century people. And this is our everything. This is all there is. Here is our kitchen, our living room, our sleeping quarters, just this one single space. Oh, look, marvellous. Off-cut limestone, this will do perfect.
The centrepiece of every medieval home was the fireplace. The fire was not just used for cooking, it also provided heat and light.
In grand houses, obviously, they sort of like cobbled this whole area. But we know from lots of archaeological digs that ordinary houses, it's just a patch on the ground. And also, I use a couple of bigger stones to balance pots on a bit.
The cottage needs somewhere to store the staple foods of wheat and barley.
Hi, Simon.
Oh, hello, Ruth. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm good, I'm good. I
Nice
was
to see you.
thinking about a grain ark.
So Ruth is calling on English carpenter Simon Dunn to make a grain ark.
I'm guessing that making furniture in the 13th century was rather different from what a modern cabinet maker would do.
Oh, certainly. Certainly very different from what anybody would do now, or even in the last couple of hundred years. You're limited by the materials and the tools available.
In the 13th century, saws were expensive, so carpenters used them only when absolutely necessary. Instead, wood was split using wooden wedges.
Whoa, wow, look at that. Split all the way around down to there.
Yeah, and then turn it over and work a bit further down.
Gosh, this is faster than sawing, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. There we go. So that's in two.
Simon splits the wood again to produce planks.
So that's, you know, I mean, that piece particularly is a really good piece of plank.
Yeah, it's pretty flat. You can work with it.
And that's a couple of minutes. I mean, I hate to think how long that would take to have sawn.
The rough planks must now be smoothed off.
This is a side axe. It's just ground on one edge, so it's flat on the other. So you can just trim up the surface a bit. You can more or less use an axe like a plane.
Once all the planks are made, the ark is assembled without nails or glue.
Pegs, your basic thing for joining furniture together.
So instead of nails?
Is pegs instead of nails, yes. So there are some things you do need a saw for. So we'll just cut the pegs off to size.
Right.
There's no glue or anything in here.
So that's just wood.
So it's just the wood holding the wood
Just
together.
wood
and
holding wood together.
it's not going anywhere. So, are you happy with that then?
I'm happy with
it. Is
it.
that going to do the job?
It'll do the job. Home isn't home without a grain arc.
Absolutely not.
Water was another vital resource to the building of a castle, and hundreds of gallons would have been used every day to make mortar alone. So castles were always built near a plentiful supply. Tom and Peter have been sent to repair the castle's well. To hoist the bucket, it needs a new rope and pulley.
How deep do you reckon that is? If we're going to make rope,
I reckon it's 10 metres down, give or take a metre. But I suspect they sunk this to a depth where they're never going to run out of water.
exactly. It's crucial for defence. It's crucial for life inside the castle once the castle's operational. You need to have that constant supply, and obviously we need it now for our building.
You're on rope, I'm on pulley.
Peter's commissioning a pulley from wood turner Gary Baker.
Well, the first stage is to select a log.
Yeah.
And the pulley's going to be in this direction, OK?
So you couldn't just cut a section through a log and just do that as a pulley?
That would never work.
Really?
The problem with the end grain,
Yeah.
it shrinks at different levels and it's just going to split apart.
Right.
So we're going to follow the grain this way. We're just going to rough chop it.
What's the wood that you're using then?
This is ash.
Yeah.
Ash is a very dry wood, and therefore when it dries, it doesn't move that much. It's not going to warp and crack.
A mandrel is hammered into the centre of the roughly shaped wood, so it can be turned on a pole lathe. Pole lathes like this have been used both in England and France since before the 10th century.
So it's just a pedal, pulling the string around the mandrel,
Yeah,
onto...
and a flexible pole. And a pole, basically, all it does is lift the pedal back up.
The roughly shaped ash is turned to make a cylinder.
I have to say, watching you, that is really, really hypnotic. But it looks knackering.
It is. It's like the gymnasium, medieval gymnasium. But you do get fit.
As well as a pulley, they'll need a rope for the well. Rope is essential on a medieval building site to lift loads and bind scaffolding. Tom's commissioning a rope for the well from the castle's rope maker, Yvan Héroard. First, he lays hemp yarns along the rope walk to form 4 strands, each with 14 yarns.
I can definitely see why this is called a rope walk. All we seem to do is walk up and down. For this 15-metre rope, he's actually walked half a mile, which is extraordinary.
The 4 strands are now complete. Next, they must be twisted together.
First stage of the twisting will actually reduce the length of these strands by about 10%, so that's about 1.5 metres. So I'm estimating that's about there.
When the traveller hits this mark, Yvonne knows the rope has been twisted the optimum number of times.
Very slowly, the traveller's moving in, but with each turn that Yvonne does, we get something that I see as being rope.
Gary's turning the cylinder into a pulley by cutting a groove in its rim.
it off. There we go. It's so smooth and so fast.
Stop.
The yarns have been twisted to form strands. Then the strands are twisted in the opposite direction to form the finished rope.
To make the strands, you twist the yarns in one direction. To make the rope, you twist the strands against each other. That way, you create that tension and that torsion, and it stops them unraveling. Merci beaucoup.
C'est terminé.
C'est parfait.
You go like that. Try thread this through before you haul it up.
Now Ruth and Peter can fit the pulley and rope to the well in the castle's courtyard.
You know, traditionally, this is where people gossip, don't you? Standing round the well.
Well, still is. Standing around the water cooler. Drop it down.
Yeah.
Long way down.
Okay.
On a medieval construction site, the majority of the water is used to make mortar to fix the quarried sandstone in place.
Okay.
The production of the daily batch is supervised by Fabrice Mangot.
Right, we need 25 baskets of this sand
25.
and 50 of this one.
Mortar makers had a vital role to play in the building of a castle, as the strength of the entire construction rested on their mixture. Formulas were closely guarded secrets and passed down from master to apprentice.
Due to the huge amounts of sand required to build this castle, they try and source as much as possible from the local area. And luckily, having the quarry right there means you've got a huge amount of sand on tap.
Lime is the key ingredient that adheres the stones to one another. It's made by heating limestone to 900 degrees and then mixing it with water to create slaked lime.
You good?
That looks very nice, Peter. Right now, I think the experience is showing for the French guys. They're really putting me to shame. It's enjoyable work, though. I actually do feel like I'm now a bit more connected to the castle.
You feel like being clean, don't you?
Well, to be honest, Peter, some of us just get on and work. And like you, who seems to roll around and every bit of building material you can. Suits you, though.
It's just that natural magnetism.
You can tell all that grey hair is actually lime mortar.
Oh, dear. It's actually just stress from working with you.
Today's batch of mortar and sandstone are destined for the Great Tower. So far, it's reached a height of 18 meters, but when complete, it will be 30 meters high. The materials are hoisted to the top using a treadmill winch. The forerunner of the modern crane, it takes 2 people to power it and can lift over half a ton.
I mean, these things are an absolute, well, godsend, aren't they? They are the machine of the medieval building site, bringing up all the stone for the walls.
What do you think? We've got 500 kg of weight we're pulling up, and yet we manoeuvre it so easily, the two of us. My strength, your ballast.
And look, there it is. This is the ultimate in medieval technology.
To lower the cargo onto the tower, the boys simply walk in the other direction.
Okay, so walk. Slowly, slowly. Yeah.
So this is our stone, the sandstone from the quarry, and it will be graded into 3 lots, isn't it? The pith, the path, the puff. That's pith, isn't it? That's
Yeah,
quite
that's
hard.
the hard.
That's path.
That's the medium.
And there'll be a puff in there somewhere.
That looks like puff.
Get some of these. The pith, the very, very hard sandstone, that is used for facing, for the structure, for the external walls, whereas the path and the puff, that's used to infill the walls, tied all together.
Philippe Delage began his career as a builder over 40 years ago. For the last 10 years, he's worked at Guédelon, where he's perfected his skills as a stonemason.
You are going to lay the mortar, but don't crush, just like this.
If you were bricklaying, you do it that way because it's got a flat surface, but the stone has to go in and the mortar has to go up into the stone.
Yeah.
So don't flatten it, OK.
Yeah.
One of the biggest challenges is ensuring the walls are absolutely straight. The integrity of the entire tower depends on it. The solution is simplicity itself. A lead weight on the end of a string, known as a plumb line.
On the scaffolding here, you'll notice there's about a 2-inch gap, so you can get your plumb line down there and make sure the wall's absolutely straight, because if it's not, tower starts going like that, it'll start going like that.
Most of these medieval tools and techniques have been around for millennia and are still used on building sites today.
Yeah.
Like that?
Yeah, like that.
Just doing the rubble infill to the wall. So we've got the facing stone, the pith, the hard stone, and that is laid horizontally, so the grain runs as it is in the ground. Which, if you imagine a book, if you lay a book horizontally and you stand on it, it will support your weight, whereas if you lay a book vertically and you stand on it, it will collapse. However, the infill, that actually gets laid vertically, so the grain is going in the opposite direction. And that's because they're all stacked against each other and they push against each other around the tower, making this absolutely solid. All the tricks of the trade.
Where's that mortar, Peter?
Already in the wall, Tom, already.
Good.
Now these, I'm hoping, are the secret ingredient to transform what is, frankly, a muddy hole into somewhere comfy to live.
Medieval sources tell us cottage floors were strewn with rushes, but just how they were laid is a bit of a mystery.
What I think might be the answer is to keep it in bundles and lay them in a sort of herringbone fashion across the whole floor. Look at that. And the temperature difference between putting your hand there and putting your hand there is quite astonishing. That is cold and wet and nasty. That is warm and dry and comfy.
Every few weeks, Ruth will lay down new bundles of rushes.
I think that when I get the fresh ones on top, what will happen is that the damp earth underneath will, as these crush down, will gradually compost, leaving you on top of new fresh reeds, well away from that, all dry and clean and warm. That's the theory. Nobody really knows quite how this works. We'll see.
Back at the castle, slowly and surely the great tower is taking shape. But before they can build up the walls any further, a doorway into its third-floor room must be installed.
We've got some limestone that's been shaped by the masons that's going to go to the great tower for the doorway into that top room. We're just using this crane, as directed by Philippe.
Using this simple lever system, one man can lift 4 times his own weight.
There you go. Yeah, it's okay.
It's then raised up the tower using the treadwheel crane.
I can see it coming up. Here it comes.
It's okay. You can come.
How do you find it, Peter?
I'm as dizzy as you like.
It's a heart rate up. Yeah, bit of a sweat going.
Would you, this was the thing that built castles. And this was the thing that made men feel quite seasick whilst on dry land, like myself.
Before the stones are fitted, a pintle is set into the stone, from which the door will be hung. It's held firmly in place using molten lead.
So what they've done is they've built this reservoir out of clay, and that way you can pour the lead in, it's not going to drain off, and you don't waste a valuable resource.
The masons have just one chance to get this right, as the lead sets almost instantly once it hits the cold stone. Getting it wrong might mean the whole stone having to be replaced.
Well, that looks brand new. That looks fantastic. It's amazing to think in a building of this size how little metal is actually used. But where it is used, it is essential.
Now the stones can be set in place, on a layer of mortar. It's essential that they're perfectly aligned. So the forerunner of the spirit level, the mason's level, is used.
Roman Britain, medieval France, or even a modern-day building site, these are tools and techniques that every builder would have been familiar with. These have been honed over centuries of use. It is timeless. It really is.
It looks good now. Yeah.
Our medieval square here says it's all good.
It's ready for the next stone.
Now the stone lintel that will top the doorway can be fitted.
This is very, very delicate work. This is an extremely heavy stone, possibly the heaviest stone we've moved so far. I mean, that is a serious bit of kit, and it struggles to lift this. It's so heavy. I think we're right on the weight limit.
Maneuvering this heavy stone with the simple crane is tricky.
Good. Okay, got it, Peter.
One slip and serious damage could be done to both the lintel and the surrounding stonework.
You got that somewhere?
Si on est pas. Yeah. Yes, well done.
Oh, I felt quite vulnerable then, I've got to be honest.
It's almost perfect.
Stone masonry, like so many medieval jobs, was heavy work. So a well-fed workforce was essential. To prepare food in the cottage, Ruth needs cooking vessels. Today, pots and pans are metal, but in the Middle Ages, they were often clay. Ruth is calling on the services of English potter Jim Newbolt.
When people think about cooking with pottery, I mean, I think people are scared of it, the idea of it now, but it used to be the way of cooking. I mean, it is the oldest form of cooking utensil of any sort.
That's it. Even your iron ones are called cooking pots. There's the clue.
First, Jim makes the basic cooking pot on the wheel. He then fits handles so it can be lifted on and off the fire.
And what I'm doing is extruding the clay.
Stretching it out.
So it means that as you pull the handle, it creates the grain. Like
So it's going to be stronger than if it was just
squashed together.
Clay is heavy and difficult to transport, so potters sourced it from as near to home as possible.
Where do you get your clay from, then?
From as close as the side of the road as you possibly can. That's a pothole. One way you could lose a wagon and team into it.
That's fabulous.
You pull over.
It's a hole where you've dug clay for pots. It's a pothole.
You pull over to let another wagon pass and glance past.
Whoa, you're
Where's it
going to
gone?
go.
Next, Jim reshapes the base of the pot.
So what shape is best, then, for fire?
For cook pots on the fire, big round bottoms.
Right, you want no sharp corners.
No, it means that the heat moves around the outside of the pot. And then with a sharp-bladed knife, we start taking off the edge there. As long as the pot's made evenly, it'll work better on the fire.
Right, so if there's big thick lumps somewhere, then you're going to have problems around that.
I'm flaring it out.
The round bottom means it won't sit on a flat surface. So the medieval pot often had legs.
There's the cook pot.
The hovel is now fully equipped and ready to sustain the workers.
This is perhaps the most important thing in it. This is our larder, our fridge, our pantry, our food supply, a grain ark. Lovely, isn't that? There it is. This is the mainstay of our diet. This is our main food. It's the starch, the bulk, and it's also the source of any beer or ale we might drink. And the lid is not attached because it goes that way up and it becomes my dough trough when I need to make bread. It's really clever, isn't it? Simple. And then I've got all sorts of food supplies hanging about, and hanging is the operative word, because I don't want anything on the floor where mice and rats can get it. So hanging it either from the walls, like the vegetables in nets, or from the underside of the roof, keeps them safe away from all the crawling vermin. And the smoke, as it percolates its way out, keeps away flies. You can think of this space not just as a living space, but as a storage space.
After a day's work, the boys have returned to put Ruth's experimental rush floor to the test.
You've spent all day working on the castle, you're tired, just come back. I mean, this is insulating, it's cushioning, it's
quite
not as
comfy.
bad as you think,
It's not as bad as you think, is it? I mean, when they say they haven't got a bed and that's it, you just get a blanket and this is what you sleep on, it sounds a bit horrendous, but it's not. It's all right. It is a tiny space, though, to live your complete life, just one little space like this, isn't it?
Yeah,
as a whole family.
I'd much rather... Well, you say it's a tiny space to live your entire life. I mean, I'd rather be in a small space like this and get the heat in. You know, it's an easier space to heat.
And also, how much time are you going to spend in here, really? Like, these days, you think, like, you know, a sitting room with a TV and a big sofa, because you're going to relax in there. We're going to be working most of the time, and you've got all your jobs and tasks to do.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like rest and relaxation isn't as important.
There's less time for it.
Yeah. Speak for yourself.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Salut.
They don't clink, do they? That's about the only thing I've got against drinking bowls. They don't clink.
It's morning, and the team are getting ready for work. Knowing what ordinary medieval people wore is a challenge, but fortunately a few items of clothing have survived.
Most useful garments were survived because they were actively kept, because they were the clothes of saints. They have been preserved in churches right across Europe. So this yellow dress that I'm wearing, this is something that has been derived from two early to mid 13th century saints. Saint Elizabeth from Germany and Saint Clare from Assisi in Italy. So it's loose, but can you see, look, there is quite a lot of shaping to it. You can see all these seams. It's made very particularly to make the cloth hang nicely no matter what position your body's in. I have a belt. However, it's not to give you a waist, but it's all about creating an attractive drape of cloth. I tell you, it's the most comfy thing I've ever worn.
It is faintly ridiculous, I think, that medieval underwear is as big as this. I think, obviously, for Tomo, that's probably an appropriate size, but both myself and Ruth could fit into these. Oh, they feel a bit like a pair of 1950s football shorts, although, in the light, vaguely see-through. And then we've just got the hose, single-legged hose at this stage. But this is very similar to kind of, I suppose, stockings and suspenders. However, if they were sewn onto the pants, pretty soon you'd have a pair of trousers. You kind of see where the evolution of clothes comes from.
Ruth's headwear is inspired by the medieval queen, Eleanor of Aquitaine.
And as she got older, she decided that her chin was sagging a bit and she wasn't looking quite as lovely as she did. So she invented a barbette, which goes under the chin and onto the top of the head and pins there. And then with a barbette, you always wear a fillet. And this is fillet, it's just another band sewn into a circle. And you wear that almost crown-like on top. It's a very 13th century look. So that's it. My French look.
Today, Tom and Peter have been summoned to the Masons' Lodge for the next stage of their apprenticeship, carving limestone. So far, they've been working with roughly hewn sandstone to build the castle walls. But for more intricate features like arches, windows and stairs, limestone was preferred, as its fine grain meant it was quicker and easier to carve.
We need for a chapel tower a lot of stone having 10 inches.
First, the boys used their splitting skills to create rough limestone blocks under the supervision of stonemason Abdelillah Abid.
The wedge is in. Now you can try the big one.
Yeah, the big hammer.
Perfect. Oh, good. Okay, very good.
The rough block is moved into the mason's lodge onto a platform known as a banker, ready for the skilled job of shaping it.
How many?
10.
Yes, very good.
Decent.
You remember.
Facing a stone was a basic skill that every stonemason would have had. First, the edges are cut using a pitch.
And the hammer. Angle about there?
Yes. Yeah. Actually, you have to do it in one time.
One
time, yeah.
One swing through.
And you have to follow it now.
Like a follow through.
Okay. Very good.
A stonemason would have learnt under the watchful eye of the master mason.
I don't want to hear this. This is a bird. Tack, 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 tack. The stonemason is rhythmical.
Yeah.
Or quick. But it is always the same. You can do very rhythmical. You only think at the rhythmical music, rhythmical, and a few minutes after, it's finished. Okay?
Stonemasons were paid per stone carved, so the quicker they worked, the more money they would earn. These limestone blocks are for the chapel tower. This year, the team are hoping to build the walls up by 6 meters to complete the chapel room itself. In the 13th century, religion was central to daily life, and nearly all castles had a chapel.
Here we are. Well, we are in this room.
Yeah.
And we have to draw the niche in the east part of the room, just in front of us.
Yeah. So this drawing you have is very much a kind of stylized view, but now as the stonemason, you must precisely mark it out.
Yes, exactly. We have now to transform imagination drawing in useful drawing.
The niche is where the altar will be. Before any building is done, the walls must be marked out with absolute precision.
Okay. This is continuing the curve of this wall.
The altar niche must be in the east of the tower. So Florian is marking out the east-west axis using an ingenious medieval tool.
I absolutely love this. It's a horn, we cut off the end. That's been tied to a piece of string, which is wound round an axle, and it is encased in ochre powder. I mean, the same ochre that we find in the quarry. When you pull the string up and snap it, it hits the ground, thus shedding the ochre and leaving an absolutely true straight line. And these, they've been around for millennia.
Using just a rope, dividers, and the ochre line, the chapel's walls are marked out. To reach this first-floor chapel, a limestone spiral staircase is being built. To design it, Florian and Tom have come to the tracing floor next to the stonemason's lodge. The tracing floor was the nerve center of the medieval building site, where the master mason drew full-scale plans.
Bonjour. Bonjour. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Using a compass, the circumference of the spiral staircase is drawn, actual size.
This is an apprentice job.
Always the apprentice, never the master. Florian and Clement are working out the central part of our staircase, and that will form the column that runs up, connecting all the stairs.
And now we're going to draw 12-step.
For the medieval mason, geometry was the jewel in the crown of their art. Using just a compass, angles and shapes could be accurately drawn to within a degree, with perfect symmetry. Here, Florian divides the circle into 6 equal segments, which are then subdivided to create 12 steps.
Now we have the steps. We can try the steps in the drawing first.
I mean, this is a fantastic way to actually make sure, before you start cutting stone, wasting materials and time, that they work. You can see there, they're bigger than my foot length, so that's workable.
Now we need to finish 1 step.
Because all the steps are the same, Florian needs to make just 1 template.
This is a precision job now. You mess this up, you're going to mess up your stone in the castle. So the last thing to do is basically just cut the template.
Sweet. You're done for you.
Thank you very much. We've got our template now placed on top of our large piece of stone. We're marking it out with a bit of slate. Magic. There it is. Now it's ready.
Just cutting.
Just cutting. 5, 10 minutes.
2 or 3 days.
2 or 3 days. You can hear how good quality this stone is by the ringing sound when Clement hits it. And I think that's why, to be honest, I'm standing here and not actually being allowed to do anything. Ah, I lie.
All right, line.
Right. An apprenticeship for a stonemason would have been about 7 years. But to be honest, as Clement says, it's actually a lifetime. You're always learning. And Peter and I haven't been here long. And, you know, just so much to take in.
Carving stone takes its toll on the tools, and every day they must be sharpened by blacksmith Martin Claudel.
Is it true at Guédelon, if there's no blacksmith here for 2 days, work stops?
Yes, work stops because we have to fix a lot of stone masonry tools, and if we don't do that, they can't work.
First, the worn-down chisel is heated to 1,000 degrees to soften its tip. To reach this temperature, bellows blow air through the fire.
I love these bellows. One goes up, the other one goes down. So it's constant airflow, isn't it?
Martin draws the chisel to a point on the anvil, then sharpens it using a file. But the chisel tip will be blunt again in no time, unless it's hardened. Hardening is one of the great discoveries of the ancient world, achieved by heating the metal, then quickly quenching it in water. As it gets hot, the metal changes color, and this tells the blacksmith how hard it will be once quenched. Too soft and it won't cut, too hard and it will shatter. To carve stone, it must get yellow hot.
He watches for the colours appearing on the surface of the metal, the blue, the red, and most importantly, the straw yellow at the very end. Now, it's ready for the masons.
There are few clues as to how ordinary people lived day to day in a medieval village. But Ruth's pieced together fragments of knowledge to work out how people did the most mundane of everyday tasks, like washing up.
I haven't got a scouring pad, but I have got sand. For the pad, well, this time of year there's plenty of fresh grass. I could use straw just as something to rub with. Now, if I've got to deal with grease, that's a different matter altogether. Sand will take the worst of it off, but, you know, I mean, no amount of scrubbing with just some more mortar is going to shift the grease out of something. You need a little bit of chemical help. And for that, I turn to wood ash, just straight out the fire.
The wood ash combines with water to make caustic soda. When it comes into contact with fat on the dishes, it makes soap, leaving the dishes spotlessly clean.
Handful of ash, wipe it round with a bit of grass or straw, rinse it out with hot water, and you get a clean pan. Easy peasy, huh?
Knowing what peasants ate in the 13th century is also a challenge. But we do know what ingredients they had to hand. Ruth has come to the castle's garden to see what there is to harvest.
Could really do with some TLC, this patch of garden. But nonetheless, a fair few things are starting to sprout through, which is a relief. So I've got parsley coming through here, and a number of other things that you might think of as weeds, and indeed they are weeds, but are edible. There's a lot of land cress with this little white flower on. So that's quite bitter in flavour, but, you know, anything to give a bit of bite.
Plants that we now consider weeds would also have been used.
There's quite a lot of dandelions and nettles too, which will help bulk it out.
Wheat and barley were also essential ingredients. Flour was expensive, so workers ground their own, using a device that has been around for 10,000 years. The quern.
This is the sound of the past. A rotary quern like this was estimated to require about an hour to an hour and a half's work every day. This is the daily grind. You pop a handful of grain in the centre, barley in this case, and off you go. The posher you were, the more refined your food was. And ordinary people often made do with food that was really quite coarse. And you can see that in people's teeth when we're dug up archaeologically.
With the tools sharpened, Clement has put the finishing touches to the step. Now comes the delicate task of transporting it to the chapel.
So your step's arriving. Yeah. Well, I say your step.
The step is winched up the castle wall, using only manpower.
Ready.
Slowly. Break off.
Once on top of the wall, it's moved up the tower using an inclined plane. One slip and the step could fall, wasting 3 days' work.
What is it, Pinfold?
Rolling.
Be careful.
Yeah.
Don't move.
Yeah.
3, 1, 2.
These guys have been doing this for 15 years. So they know how to get things like this up here. But it's amazing what they can move without the use of what we call machines, but essentially the use of rollers, levers, inclined planes, pulleys, all made out of wood. Wood and stone working together, perfect harmony. Be like me and Tomo.
Do you
want to nip down first, Ruth?
Okay.
Come with us.
Each step must be absolutely level, or else the staircase will veer to one side. A mason's level and plumb line are used to ensure it's perfectly positioned.
I suppose this staircase has still got quite a long way up to go, isn't it? And if this isn't absolutely perfect, the first little bit of skew, and that just gets magnified as you go up. But carrying anything up here, or, God forbid, fighting your way up here, it'd be really difficult, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Tomo's not stuck down there, is he?
Wedged.
Using the greens from the garden and the ground barley, Ruth is cooking a medieval pottage in the clay pot.
So, a little bit of water in there. I'm going to start with my leeks. This time of year, nettles are still quite tender. I wouldn't say that you add nettles for flavour particularly, but they are quite good bulk. They're one of the few things that grows in profusion at this time of year. That's softened down a bit now.
Grain is added to create a porridge-like dish.
Hello, Ruth.
Oh, you're back. How was it today?
It's going very, very well. It's amazing how the whole thing is... It's all in two-dimensional layers. But then you see, a third dimension appear, such as the doorway that we've been working on, put the lintel on there. Suddenly, wow.
It gives me a real feel, too, of just how much impact such places must have had on people. You know, if everybody's living in this sort of little tiny one-room, hearth in the centre, low building, and then there's that funking great thing up there, it's quite a shock to the system, really, isn't it? I mean, it makes a huge impact.
Well, this is a period when these great, military buildings, religious buildings are starting to rise up and really make an impact on the landscape.
The team are also getting used to the simple medieval food.
This is a triumph. This is an absolute triumph.
For barley and vegetables, it's not bad.
You're a hungry man. You've been pounding all day at the stone, walking on the treadwheel. Anything is good to eat.
It's not exactly easy either, grinding the darn stuff. I bet it's just as hard work as pounding away all day in the quarry.
There's no easy jobs in the medieval age.
No, there aren't, are there?
Next time, defending the castle with crossbows
Nice.
and architecture against the most powerful weapon of the age,
3, 2, 1, tirez!
the trebuchet. Castles dominated the medieval landscape, and Britain has some of the finest in the world. Today, most are decaying relics, many of their secrets buried in time. Now, historian Ruth Goodman and archaeologists Tom Pinfold and Peter Ginn are turning the clock back to relearn the secrets of the medieval castle builders.
This is the ultimate in medieval technology.
The origin of our castles is distinctly French, introduced to Britain at the time of the Norman conquest of 1066.
3, 2, 1, tirez!
Here in the Burgundy region of France is Guédelon Castle, the world's biggest archaeological experiment. A 25-year project to build a castle from scratch, using the same tools, techniques, and materials available in the 13th century.
It's a lot of hard work at the coalface, because this is industry.
For the next 6 months, Ruth, Peter, and Tom will experience the daily rigours of medieval construction.
Drop down. Yep.
And everyday life. How workers dressed and ate.
You can really smell your food, Ruth.
And the art of combat. This is the story of how to build a medieval castle. It's April, and since their arrival a month ago, the team have been learning ancient skills from the Guédelon masons.
Perfect. Oh, good.
They've also set up a base for themselves in the shadow of the castle.
Building a castle involves such a lot of people, and they've all got to live somewhere.
The 13th century was part of the golden age of castle building, when ever-evolving tactics and fortifications were driven by the legacy of bloody crusades and vicious dynastic struggles. Medieval dynasties sought to expand their influence and protect their gains. They built imposing stone castles, not only to assert power, but more fundamentally, to withstand attack. Now the team learn about building the castle's defensive structures. They'll look at the ingenious features medieval castle builders devised and explore the craft behind the weapons they had to resist.
Defence for me really is the raison d'etre of a castle. It's not just, the battles, the attacking, the defending. It's the structural input that you have to think about. Your defensive, your curtain walls, your towers, things like that.
They are defensive structures, I suppose. I mean, they're much more than that, though, aren't they? I mean, they are about defending yourself psychologically. They're about telling everybody, don't even try it. And what about the weapons, too? I mean, what could they actually do against a castle? How effective were they?
Yeah. I guess how many men do you need to defend a castle?
And you'd need some ruddy, great big stores of food. And castles, people sometimes, knights and princesses, but it isn't. It's mostly about the likes of us, isn't it? It's about everybody else. And how do we survive?
Yeah.
A castle like this at Guédelon would have been built for a prosperous lord who wanted to display his wealth and power, and also needed his home to be strong enough to withstand potential attack. And this dictates much of its design, with 36 feet high curtain walls protecting the courtyard and residential spaces. Entry is via a twin-towered gatehouse, and at each corner above the crenellated walls, there will be 4 round towers, the highest of which will be the Great Tower, a superb vantage point at nearly 100 feet high. In charge of the defensive structure of the castle is Master Mason Florian Ranucci. He's traveled the world studying the ancient secrets behind medieval stonework.
So a lot more stones come out of the quarry now.
Guédelon's walls are over 12 feet thick in places. Today, the masons are placing a special long stone called a boutis into a section of castle wall, designed specifically to reinforce it against attack.
The boutis is to connect the front of the wall, front part, to the stone inside the wall.
Right.
The boutis, for instance, you have one here. This stone here is very long. It's here.
Yeah. I
And
see that, yeah.
we have to have a wall really strong.
Yeah.
This wall have to resist an enemy.
Yeah.
And the better way to fight a castle is to throw stone to the wall.
Yeah.
If we don't put boutis, the front part of the wall will go down.
You can really see from this wall that you've got the external face, the internal face, and a bit in the middle, the infill.
Exactly. We are going to put one boutis. Can you help us?
Yeah, definitely.
Very good.
You're feeling strong, Peter.
I don't need to. That's the beauty of this.
Yes, try to be always in the middle of the stone.
Right.
It's a heavy stone to have a strong castle.
Boutis stones are not just placed at random. They're fixed into the wall at 3 feet intervals to give maximum strength.
The boutis goes in the middle of the joint.
So it's just linking in, but it's so clever because the pressure is now spread between two stones.
Yes, we have to think everything. It's like a game.
Yeah. Like medieval Tetris.
At Guédelon, they're using a medieval formula to make mortar, mixing water with quarry sand and lime putty. Unlike lime produced industrially, it will take many centuries to set completely.
We were afraid about it.
Because thousands of tons of stone being held together, it was a bit of a risk at the start then.
Exactly. And it's perhaps the first time in Guédelon that we use this old way of making mortar.
Through experimentation, they've discovered that clay impurities in the quarry sand give this mortar great strength.
So the experimental archaeology is actually giving you a really good building substance to build your castle.
Exactly.
Tom's just putting the mortar down here, and he's making it rough, so when the stone goes down, that mortar will press into the cracks of the stone. If it was smooth, then you just have gaps, so if there's a bump in the stone and smooth mortar, it just wouldn't touch it. Whereas because he's making it all rough, it will squidge together and just keep that stone absolutely solidly fixed into place. It's looking good, Tom.
Every stone has to be in line because this is going to go up and up and up, potentially another 4 meters. These stones are slightly off, your build is slightly off, and eventually it'll collapse.
Now the stone will be
solid.
Solid.
The biggest threat to castles were sieges. These were far more common than pitched battles and could last for months, even years. If they couldn't get through the gates, invaders could try going over the walls with towers and ladders, or mining under them. But another, more sophisticated means of attack developed. From basic stone throwers to mangonels, couillards, and trebuchets, a range of deadly medieval war machines evolved. These came to dominate siege warfare for hundreds of years, until they were ultimately superseded by the cannon.
The largest ever trebuchet, it is thought, was that commissioned by Edward Longshanks, King of England, in the War of Scottish Independence. And he was trying to bring down Stirling Castle. It was a vast beast, called Warwolf as a nickname. Disassembled, it took 30 wagons to move it. 5 master carpenters worked on it along with 49 other workers. And it could hurl an object of 300 pounds weight with accuracy.
30 miles from Guédelon is Saint-Brisson Castle, which houses a collection of replica siege engines. The Romans introduced basic catapults to Britain. But by the 13th century, the development of counterweight technology saw the introduction of deadly, high-powered stone-hurling war machines. They were used in sieges to bombard defending troops and collapse castle walls. The crew wear protective helmets in case the machine malfunctions.
How big do you think that counterweight is? How's it going, Tom?
It's good, mate. It's amazing how only 4 people can manoeuvre such a heavy counterweight.
Yeah, I mean, that's about 500 kilograms. The energy you're putting into that to raise it up is going to be stored as potential energy. Then when it's released, this, which is about 10 kilograms, this ball is going to be swung out and flung into the distance. They reckon it'll go about 100 metres. Looking good. Right, he's just going to lock this off. There we go. Tension's on the pin. Now it's locked off, they can unwind this rope so that when it fires or when it's loosed, the rope doesn't hold it back. So here we go, unwinding the rope. Whoa, watch those handles. Well, this is a well-trained crew. They know what they're doing. I mean, this is it's very different, isn't it, from doing it in peacetime as it would be in the heat of battle.
That's the thing about the shouting, the noise.
Yeah.
These ropes can snap, the wood can snap.
Here we go. The ball, the projectile, into the sling, and it's ready to go. So we're standing back. Standing back. So we're just moving back.
Go to the seclusion zone.
I imagine if it was in the heat of battle, you'd just be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd feel quite lonely if you were the guy who was about to pull the rope.
Right, we're going to count down.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, tirez!
But you still, look how much energy is still in that.
And you have to get the mathematics absolutely right. The difference between the length of that arm and the length of the rope and the things. If you don't get that spot on, it can fly backwards instead of flying forwards.
But if you deconstruct this, it's essentially scaffolding. It's a mason-shaped
It
ball.
is.
It's the ropes that you made
And it's
on
exactly
site.
the same mathematics
Yeah.
that the masons are
Yeah.
using. I mean, it's really, it's sort of simple, but it's also really quite sophisticated.
If you can build a castle, you can fight a castle.
Well, that's the arms race that's happening in our period, isn't it? The castles get more strong, more developed, more technical, and so the siege weapons become stronger, more powerful, more technical. It's each driving each other further and further onwards.
It's not fast, though, is it?
No.
Despite being slow, these mighty war machines were greatly feared in the Middle Ages. Some fortified towns surrendered at the very sight of them.
Right.
Shall we go and have a look?
Projectiles ranged from carved stone or mortar balls like these, to rotting animal carcasses intended to spread disease, and even the heads of defeated soldiers to really lower morale.
It's funny, isn't it, looking at the damage, you know, because it is just a small hole. But I suppose when you think again against a stone wall, it's going to keep going until it finds a weakness.
This is
one
the
after
hammer, isn't it?
another. Yeah.
Yeah, a hammer doesn't crack
It's
something
not a
with
great
one
explosion.
blow.
It's
The persistent drip, drip, drip until you crack.
As well as being an archaeologist, Tom is a midshipman in the Royal Naval Reserve with a special interest in military history. He's been looking into what kind of armour an ordinary soldier might have worn in the 1200s. Not everyone could afford the expensive metal helmets and mail worn by wealthy lords and knights. A more basic form of protection commonly worn for combat was the Gambeson, a padded linen tunic whose main protective element was sheep's wool. Tom's visiting Ruth in the hovel. She wants to make him a Gambeson, and the process starts with the sheep's wool.
Ruth, when you asked me here for a fitting for my protective clothing, I was thinking chainmail and armour. That's not the case, is it?
no. This is, well, it is, but it's not. This is cloth armour.
Cloth armour.
Yeah.
And that's good, is it?
It is good. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
going to be glad of this, I reckon. So you may have lots and lots and lots of layers of linen, and then a big fat layer of wool, prepared wool, and then more layers, many, and then you've got to stitch the whole lot together really tight. Not so it's like big and fluffy like a duvet,
Right. Compact it down.
compacted right down into something truly dense.
I mean, it's almost, this is, modern body armour is the evolution from this. You've still that balance between protection and manoeuvrability and trying to cover as much of the body as possible.
And this is the ancestor of Kevlar, of the bulletproof vest.
Here it goes.
One of the defining visual features of medieval castles is their arrow loops. The ingenious design of these simple slits in the walls provided protection and gave castle archers a huge advantage.
Very good.
Guédelon mason Constantin Lemel has specially shaped a stone needed for building an arrow loop in a corner tower. Before they mortar the stone in place, they need to be sure it fits.
Right, so that's in position. I thought that was going to go the other way around, actually. I thought...
No, we have to alternate. We have to have a long face here and after a short one.
Yeah, okay.
And when you have a short one, you have a long here and a short under. It's to get something very stronger when you cross the stones.
Yeah, okay.
The funnel-shaped design of the arrow loop, tapering to a mere 3-inch gap, gave attackers outside only a tiny slit to aim at, while the defenders could look out without being seen. The arrow loops sloped down, so archers could see invaders, even at the foot of the tower.
If it was like this, for instance, we can't
hit people over there.
Fight and shoot people. So people
got step ladder.
So people can be in front of the tower, no problem for them.
Completely safe. And I guess also this is a weak point of the castle, isn't it? You're actually creating a crack in your castle wall, so you need to reinforce it.
People say that in the 13th century, the round tower was very useful to resist when stones are throwing on the tower. Because when the stones are coming, the round form used to be stronger.
I guess you spread the pressure, don't you? If the stone hits there and it's curved, then all these other stones take the impact.
Exactly.
Well, Peter and I are probably firing arrows out. We just break our arrows on the inside, so...
Of course, it'll be interesting to see if you fire an arrow or a bolt back in.
That's it, that's the trick, isn't it? If you're attacking, you want to be able to know, you can at least scare people, if not kill them, on the inside.
There'll be around 40 arrow loops in the finished castle. In order to test their effectiveness, Peter and Tom will need a suitable weapon. One of the most infamous at the time was the crossbow. First seen in 4th century BC China, by the 1200s, crossbows were increasingly used in European siege warfare.
Crossbows were probably introduced into Britain around the time of the Norman conquest. In some ways, they were less effective than the longbows. They took an awful lot longer to load, so the rate of fire was much, much slower. Out in the battlefield, in the heat of the moment, they were pretty useless. But in a siege, it was a completely different thing. Behind some nice, safe walls, you had time. And it was the sort of weapon that anybody could use with no training and no skill at all. Richard the Lionheart eventually met his end when a crossbow bolt fired by a boy in 1199 pierced him in the shoulder. The resulting infection did for him.
As a weapon that made knights more vulnerable to lowly foot soldiers, some despised it for breaking the conventions of chivalry. But the art of crossbow making became a whole industry by the 13th century. In Britain, it survives to this day, among a few specialist craftsmen, like bowyer Chris Jury.
This is what's going to be known as a crossbow prod, which is basically the bow on a crossbow.
What kind of wood is this?
This is yew wood. Now, yew wood is probably the best wood for making a bow. In any piece of yew, you get the sapwood and the heartwood. The sapwood is good in tension, which means it can stretch, and the heartwood is good in compression, which means it can crush. So the two grow naturally together in a single piece of wood to form a natural spring.
Chris uses a spoke shave to take off the bark.
I would imagine in the medieval period they would have done it in like a production process, so it would be done in fairly large batches. Apprentices would have started off maybe the sort of age of 13, 14. After 7 years, then you was a journeyman who was nearly at the point where he was a master of the craft. Then you'd be a master bow maker, and by that time you wouldn't even get your hands dirty with the making of the bows. You just let your minions get on and do it for you, basically.
So as I am your apprentice, is there any chance I can have a go with that?
Yeah, of course you can, yes. Yeah.
You want to be gentle, but you've also got to put a bit of pressure on, haven't you?
It is, yeah, it's quite a delicate task because you don't want to be cutting into the sapwood at all. You just want to remove the bark.
Taking off lumps there.
Otherwise you may want
don't
to...
look, don't look. I'll start down.
The next stage is to taper the prod with an axe.
Yeah, I can tell you've used an axe before. You've definitely got a better technique than that with a spoke shave. If you don't mind me saying so.
Well, the more we do this, the more likely it is that I'm going to make a mistake. You need all 10 toes, do you?
Yeah, you amputate one of your own legs.
Gone.
That's it, that's good, that's good.
Yeah, a bit of aggression is okay.
Yeah, that's it, gone.
A draw knife is used to further smooth and shape the crossbow
That's it,
prod.
round it in. That's it, it's still way too thick, so you can take off a lot of wood.
I suppose, like with everything, it's just about getting your eye in, understanding the material you're working with and understanding the tools, and hopefully it all comes together.
Yes, that's why certain tools like the axe and like the spoke shave and the draw knife are ideal because they follow the grain. So while the tools look a bit crude, they actually do the job rather well. But you can understand how the apprentices did 7 years because it's quite a specialist kind of task, really. So it's
yeah.
That's starting to take shape rather nicely. If you've done good work with your tapers, then it should bend relatively evenly.
Well, I think I've done exceptional work with my taper.
Well,
so.
it looks pretty good.
You are so accurate with that.
Carpenter Sam Rooney has come all the way from New Zealand to work at Guédelon. In his spare time, he makes traditional bows. Today, Sam and Ruth are experimenting with making a crossbow arrow, known as a bolt or quarrel, which was shorter, heavier, and more deadly than a regular arrow.
You imagine an arrow, whether it be for a crossbow or a longbow, and you imagine a little stick.
Yeah.
Why are you starting with a great big piece of wood?
Mainly for mass producing arrows. You can have several lengths of a tree and then just split it into small squares.
So I suppose if you think really mass production, that makes sense, doesn't it? If you've got to make 20,000 for a castle, the amount of time it would take you to find 20,000 sticks that were the right size and shape.
You have to send an army of people off to gather twigs.
Yeah, whereas 2 or 3 trees would do you your 20,000 arrows.
Yeah.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. You're just squaring this off at the moment, are you?
Yeah, I'm just squaring it off using a medieval bandsaw.
The thin piece of wood is then cut into individual strips, which will be shaped to make each bolt shaft.
And it'll be practically a circle, like this one here.
All right,
so that one's pretty much finished.
Yeah, that's about as round as you're going to need, isn't it?
So we're going to drill a small hole in the end of the bolt.
A metal bolt head is then attached.
You would not want that pushed through you, would you? Oh.
No.
What a foul-looking thing.
And the slit is cut so it can be fletched. It's recorded that in 1250, a chief English quarrel maker produced 25,000 quarrels a year and could be expected to make 100 in a single day.
It is a huge amount of work, all of this, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I guess so.
Bows are still really woven into our modern life. I mean, think of the surnames. Bowyer, Fletcher, Stringer, Archer. And then all the number of phrases that come from one form of archery or another. Things like to pick a quarrel, or a bolt from the blue, or he's got lots of strings to his bow. They're all archery terms.
They finish off their bolt by warming up a medieval glue made from an unusual source.
It's made from the bladder of a fish. You actually get the bladder and dry it out. Show a bit of glue in here.
So it's just a bit of glue on the leather, shove it in the slot.
Yeah.
That's it. There we go, one quarrel. Well, thanks very much. I shall give it a go.
Okay, good luck.
Thanks, Sam.
By the end of the 12th century, a new design of crossbow was introduced. The addition of a metal stirrup enabled the crossbowman to hold the bow with his foot and draw back the string, either with both hands or a belt hook. This was known as spanning the bow. Peter has come to make the stirrup with Martin Claudel, who's been a blacksmith at Guédelon for 4 years.
And they use a process called smith and striking. The smith is the blacksmith. He's the guy doing the thinking. He's got the little hammer. He's moving the metal around. He taps it. The striker has the big hammer, and that is me. I always hate doing the striking. I've got no rhythm, basically. But then he hits, I hit. He hits, I hit. And when he hits the anvil, I stop. OK, we good? And,
You're done.
All right.
Peter and Martin will hammer the iron flat and then bend it at 4 corners, making a stirrup shape.
I think we got away with that. It's certainly starting to take shape. We've got a kink in it. We've got a bend. And in these two ends, he's going to fire weld. So he's basically splitting the metal. So when they come together, they interlock. He'll heat all that up, and then he'll basically smack it as hard as he can and compact that back into a single piece of metal, essentially creating a fire weld, which is ultimately very, very strong, which will give it the strength it needs. Because if you think about putting your foot in it and pulling on that crossbow in order to cock it, you don't want your metal coming apart. He's going to ramp up the heat so it goes white hot. The reason for the darkness in here is so he can see the colours. Here we go. That's fantastic. Are you happy?
I'm happy.
Yeah.
Back at the hovel, Ruth has enlisted some help to stitch Tom's Gambeson together.
Oh, hi, chaps.
Oh, dear. What are these? You're making rugs or something, are you?
You told me they were making you a suit of armour.
We are. Very, very, very slowly. That's the first layers of cloth all sewn together with the wool going on top.
Yeah.
And then I've started quilting this panel.
So it's like a front piece and a back piece?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you start sewing, you can see it starting to compress it down. Look, have a feel of the difference of that. Look how wobbly that is, soft and wobbly.
Yeah.
And then feel where it is when it's sewn.
Oh, wow.
I think
it's
so.
nice to be fight in the winter, because this looks quite warm.
I think it's quite warm. And in fact, I have to be honest, don't fight anytime soon. You won't believe, this is a day's work. I mean, I've done nothing all day today except this.
Who's wearing Gambesons?
They're being worn by men-at-arms, fairly ordinary soldiers, you know, and being worn by the rich soldiers in combination with chainmail. So they're being worn by quite a lot of people.
Yeah, I'd certainly be happier if I was on the walls wearing a Gambeson to sort of stand there with my crossbow than I would be if I just...
I don't know.
In the 13th century, Gambeson making was a skilled craft, done mainly by men.
You keep your right arm underneath, so you just keep poking and pointing. And I find if you stretch the cloth with your left hand...
Blimey.
Yeah, blimey, I'm glad you said that. Now, you've missed. Look, you've come up right over there.
Don't want to go back down?
Yeah. You've got to come up in line.
OK, OK.
He's not a natural, is he?
At least I'm giving it a go,
At
eh?
least you're giving it a go.
No,
No,
missed
try
again.
again.
This is like pot luck. Right, this time.
OK. That's better. That'll do, that'll do. It's good enough. Right.
Yeah.
And you need to pull really tight, though don't break the thread.
Yeah.
Marvellous. And then straight back down again.
Straight back down.
That's it. And catch it with the other arm.
Do not envy one eye.
It is slow, isn't it?
It is.
Chris is nearing the final stages of his work on the crossbow.
OK, so here we have your bow, all nicely shaped and expertly tapered and nice and smooth. And now the next stage is to make sure it bends evenly.
The prod is ready to be put under tension, using a tiller stick. If the bow is not evenly shaped, the prod may snap.
So now we basically examine the curve of the bow.
Right.
So the trick is you need to spot the weak bits before they develop into a problem and shave them away.
So even after all this time and all this work, there's still actually jeopardy about whether it'll actually be effective.
There's a massive amount of jeopardy involved in doing it. This is the real art of the bow. You need to train your eye to see the curve and to notice any flat spots in the curve.
I was going to say, because to be honest, it looks pretty good to me.
So we're happy with that. That'll make a good shooting bow.
The deep ditch and sloped walls at the base of the castle are designed to make them harder to approach. The only entrance across the ditch is a 10-foot-high bridge to the main gate. A structure which relies on a very humble element to hold it together: the nail. 677 were needed to make this bridge, all forged on site. Martin the blacksmith makes all the nails for the doors and fixtures in the castle. Inspired by a popular story from the Middle Ages, Ruth has come to the blacksmith's forge.
I'm going to have a go at making a nail. This, believe it or not, is a really female activity. The story goes that when they needed the nails to crucify Christ, the blacksmith that they asked refused to be involved, and his wife stepped up. "I'll make them," she said. It was a story that had a lot of popularity in the 13th century, and as a result, there are lots and lots of pictures of women working at a blacksmith's forge, nail making. Frequently rather ugly, demonized women. Great big hook noses, but dressed just like me. This one little piece of metal that we're working, how many nails will it make?
Maybe between 10 and 20, maybe.
It's not many, is it, for this
Not
much
many.
work?
I mean, I suppose that really explains why things like furniture are made entirely with no nails. They're all made of wood with wood joints. So you only use your nails where you really need them.
It's a precious thing, the nail.
It's a funny thing that when you talk about the past and you list all the crafts, people imagine that that means it's only men. If you look at the lists of guilds people in London and indeed in Paris, it's amazing how many crafts are in fact headed up by a female name. There were female blacksmiths.
Once the iron has turned red in the hearth, it softens and can be worked.
Almost ready.
Almost ready.
Ruth is going to try smith and striking with Mortar.
I can scarcely lift this hammer, let alone do anything useful with it. We'll see. Scary moment. I've got a block of wood to stand on because I'm short. Oh, sorry. I'm not on strike, am I? Oh, terrible.
Okay.
Woo!
Good.
Well, Martin is having to reshape it as my hits are not quite central, and so I'm making dents down the edges, and he's being very... sorting out all my...
The metal is heated again and again,
Nice and sharp on the end.
and gradually driven into a point before being squared up. The head is then shaped.
And gets clouted. That's it. And just straightened out. And plunged in the water to cool it. Just like that. I can really see why 13th century people were finding ways of using as few nails as possible. Such a lot of work.
The stirrup is in a fairly straight line.
To make the finished weapon, crossbow expert Robin Knight binds Peter's iron stirrup and Tom's yew prod.
I mean, one of the interesting things for me about making this crossbow is you're relying on a lot of different skills. You know, a blacksmith making a stirrup, a bowyer making the...
There was no such thing as a crossbow maker. One man made the tiller, the blacksmith made all of the ironwork, another man made the string. That's where you get the surname Stringer. When the guy at the end of the process got all the bits together, he didn't know how each individual part was made, because to him, and the trades were, before the guilds, were called mysteries, to him it was a mystery.
Right, that's simple.
He just wasn't aware of how it was done.
Group of individuals with very specific knowledge and skills.
Exactly.
Bringing together almost like a flat pack of a crossbow, and then one man
put it together.
What separates the crossbow from the longbow is really, in defence, you don't actually need a huge amount of strength or skill to use it. You can use it effectively.
Training for longbows took from about the age of 7. Crossbowman, you can train him up in half a day. But he's still got the capability of killing you with half a day's training as a longbowman with 15 years training.
I mean, this is a weapon that was actually banned by the church, wasn't it?
A weapon unfit to be used on Christians, only to be used on heathens and Saracens. Nobody liked crossbows. Unfortunately, you get the oddballs like me that sort of quite like them. OK, now we come to the crunch. We're going to span the bow.
Moment of truth.
The moment of truth.
Stirrup works. Get your foot in there.
OK, is everybody
Holy mother.
So
That looks pretty good, doesn't it?
It looks solid. It's a proper piece of killing machinery, that.
Back at the castle, the team are almost ready for basic siege combat.
Look at you two relaxing. I've been away working. This is it. There's your stirrup, mate. I'll come in between you if that's all right.
That looks pretty good.
Are you surprised?
Yes.
Fair enough. I'll be honest, it wasn't me that did most of it. This is our medieval killing machine.
That's quite a long trigger there.
It's a long trigger.
Oh, wow.
And that's our ammunition, is it?
Okay.
Yeah, it looks quite deadly.
God, that looks horrible, doesn't it?
When you think if you've dipped that in some animal dung or something like that, you've actually got a biological weapon there as well. You're going to infect someone, even if you don't kill them straight off. Yeah. You're going to do damage. It's not a nice weapon.
Is there any such thing?
Wow, very true, very true.
So, Ruth, how is Tomo's Gambeson coming off?
Well, it's not finished, I can tell you that.
That's it there, is it?
Yeah, where's the front panel? I got it sort of shaped and
That's looking pretty
mostly
good.
bound. It's a pretty rigid beast. Have I got the right shape?
Quite heavy.
Ooh. Oh!
Come on, get you.
Oh, blimey. So how much more work is there to
Well,
do
I'm
on
going to
this?
do the back panel. You're not getting sleeves. I've given up on sleeves. Initially, I was going to plan you the proper full Gambeson with the sleeves, but I'm sorry.
I think it would be a bit like a straitjacket if it had sleeves, but...
I found
Never
an
beg.
ancient Gambeson that's at the end of its life. If you want to try a complete one on. But
Put one on Peter.
Oh, no.
I told you it was a bit smelly and ancient, didn't I?
This is classic Ginn.
It's smelly.
Oh,
Might actually be alive.
smells like a
this.
tent, that.
It's like a straitjacket, doesn't
Arms out.
it? See, look how much softer this one is than the other one. This is much more flexible.
I quite like mine, to be honest. I like the cleanness of mine.
Cleanness.
Let's do me up.
It is like in a straitjacket.
You start at the top, do you? Shall I hold it across?
Yeah.
You could just imagine some chaps trying to get into all this lot in a hurry, can't you?
It's a real team effort, isn't it, actually?
They are. Go on, that'll do. What do you think?
Yes, this is...
Suits you.
It's pretty good.
Not just sustaining. You feel strong?
Yeah.
You've got a few little weak points.
It's going to protect.
Those who could afford it would have covered their Gambeson with a chainmail shirt, weighing over 25 pounds.
There's only one way of doing this.
Oh, no, this is like...
Right hand to the right piece.
Oh, my hair's stuck in it. Oh, I'm going to have a bald spot by the time I get out of here.
Can you get in?
Oh, we've lost a sleeve on this side.
That's so glamorous.
Here we go.
Pull your sleeve up.
There we go.
Oh,
How's
yeah.
your movement now? I mean, see, it's a
It's
bit,
good. It's
bit more restrictive under the armpits.
It's actually
isn't
not that restrictive. It's just the weight, you know.
It's heavy.
It's heavy.
It's really heavy.
But it's not that heavy. I can still...
Do this.
And you see the chainmail on, it actually looks like it would give you better protection than I thought originally against something like
it
this.
is quite dense, isn't it?
That's fine. That's actually fine.
I'll take a run up. Close contact.
You're going to be
Yeah.
pretty safe from a sword blow, aren't you? In that?
Yeah.
Now we get to see him taking that off.
We're not going to help him then?
No.
Oh, sorry, Peter.
No, this is going to be the amusing moment.
Here we go.
I've seen some, some wonderful period images of blokes trying to get out of their male shirts. Go on.
Here we go. Here we go. The years I spent in the asylum.
This is exactly what the pictures show. This is exactly what they show.
Unbelievable. I'm impressed.
Wow, that's a weight off your shoulders.
The team are going to give the Gambeson a sterner test, using their new crossbow.
I can't tell you how glad I'm not really in the 13th century facing an invading army. I just can't imagine how horrible that would be.
Bolts shot from a high-powered crossbow could be as deadly as bullets and shell fire.
OK, you can duck down so you can rest. Hide. Thumbs on there.
Oh, I wish
Okay.
it looked less like a person.
There's no head.
Oh, it's horrible.
No, there is. It's very, very small.
OK, here we go.
OK.
3, 2, 1.
Ah, thank goodness for that, I missed.
Load you up, big boy. You're below that. 3, 2, 1. Nice.
You meanie. You meanie.
Well, I've gone to the side and low.
Yeah, yeah.
Should we have a look?
Yeah.
How are we looking? How?
Oh, it has gone through.
It's gone through, is it?
That much. I really expected that to be, you know, up to.
Yeah,
up to the
I thought it was
flight.
going to be spaded into you. Yeah.
But let's not forget the quality of the Gambeson. You know, that layered approach has obviously worked.
While some sieges were won by overpowering the castle, it was often something far more basic which finally forced the defenders to surrender.
In truth, when castles fell, it was rarely to actual siege engines and far more frequently to starvation. Indeed, in 1215 at Rochester, besieged inside the castle, the people were holding out. King John, on the outside, had amassed 5 trebuchets that were battering the walls for 2 months. Inside, food was running short, and they looked around them and began to eat their expensive war horses. And it was only when they had finished eating every horse that they surrendered.
Defending your food was a vital aspect of strategic castle design. With this in mind, Guédelon's Great Tower contains its own food store and a well. It's the castle's ultimate stronghold. If the walls were breached, it would be possible to fall back to the Great Tower. Next to the Great Tower is the kitchen, where Ruth begins preparing a meal fit for fighting men. Meanwhile, Peter and Tom are about to put the arrow loops of the Great Tower to the test.
That's quite a narrow target, isn't it, really? You know, I mean, do you ever really aim to hit someone on the other side, or are you just trying to get the bolt out the gap?
Can't actually see much out of there.
I guess there's only one thing to do.
Yeah, go for it. Are you aiming for anything out there, or are you just...
Just aiming for the gap, my friend.
Aiming for the gap. Right, bolts in, touching string.
Okay.
That was fast. In this environment, that seemed far more powerful and these a lot faster.
Well, I guess from a defensive point of view then, something like that, shooting out the loop, no, it's a bit of a fear factor straight away, isn't it?
Satisfied with the defensive capacity of Guédelon's arrow loops on the inside, Tom and Peter set about seeing how resistant they are to attack from the outside.
Do you think we can get a bolt through that gap? Luckily, we're not under fire. We're not having rocks thrown at us.
I reckon we could definitely do it in 6.
Should we give it a go then?
Yeah, let's give it a go.
Okay. So you're going to load for me?
I'll load. Arrow in the groove.
It's on the string. It's loaded.
that was terrible. That
No, it wasn't.
After many attempts, a shot finally finds its target.
Yes!
A feat that would be somewhat harder to achieve in the heat of battle.
That was lucky.
Well, still. I mean, that was a good height on there as well. That would have gone in about head height inside.
Yeah. Architecturally, these arrow loops, they work for this castle, don't they? You can be in there, you can fire out, but if you're outside here, trying to fire in, it's not impossible, but it's lucky if you do.
While Peter and Tom return to the building work, in the castle kitchen, Ruth is preparing food for medieval men-at-arms.
It is slightly conjectural. We have to sort of look at as many sources as we can to come up with what a 13th century soldier would actually be eating. So it largely comes down to pork. Pork was considered to be the food which was most compatible with the human body.
Medieval thinking was that the body of someone of high social standing digested and responded to food differently to that of a common man. So their food needed to be cooked differently.
For the common soldiery, it just all goes in. Fat, skin, marrow, all good for building strong fighting bodies.
This broth, or pottage, simply contains pork, onions, beans and some herbs.
So that should just quietly cook for the next couple of hours. So almost the same ingredients. The pork, the beans and the onions are also going to form the basis of dishes suitable for the Lord. But it is the cooking methods that make the difference. 13th century medical ideas thought of the stomach as a cauldron that had to cook through the food. They thought that by cooking food itself, you could be helping the stomach to do that process. So for the Lord, we start by boiling the meat. It's parboiled, part cooked by boiling it. Then we roast it, which is the stage I've reached here. And then once it's mostly roasted, it's going to come off the spit again, cut up, and then fried lightly. So this is still running a little bit pink, done to a turn, as they say, meaning to within one turn of the spit, which is exactly what I want, ready for this last quick flash fry. Although we call it frying, it's more like sort of braising. I shan't give it long. About 2 minutes, and it'll be done. And that with the beans and a sprinkle of dandelion leaves should make him one of the most fearsome warriors in Christendom.
It's nearly time to down tools at the end of the day. But first, there's a special delivery to the top of the tower.
Oh, you can really smell your food, Ruth.
What have you got for us?
Smoke.
Oh, wow.
Well.
Right on cue.
Oh, pass.
All right. Crockery.
Crockery.
Fried onions.
Fried onions.
Tomo's food.
Beans.
My food.
Oh, pork.
A nicely balanced diet, then.
Oh, yeah. So, you know, where do you fancy yourself on the social scale, really?
I know where I am on the social scale. I'm roughing it at the moment.
Oh, and by the way, dandelion petals, they are associated with the planet Mars. So you're going to be that martial by the time you're finished. That's the point.
I see.
Yeah? So you're going to start with
I'll start with a bit of pottage.
some man-at-arms.
Yeah.
I know you're a man.
You've
got to start doing a bit of work.
I'll eat this, I'll start working.
I'm gonna nick a bit of that thrice cooked pork.
It would all look more lovely, wouldn't it, if it was on silver platters on there with beautiful napkins and so forth, but never mind.
It's got that rustic look to it.
Yeah, I'm good at rustic. I don't really do posh, pretty food.
But if you're up on the walls doing guard duty, I reckon you actually want the kind of pottage, almost stew type meal. You can just, you know, you don't have to think about it. You can just enjoy your food.
Yeah,
it's going to warm you up.
Of course, I suppose, you know, if you're in a castle, this is a great meal on day one of the siege. But by day 4, you're starting to look at the stocks and say, how much have we got? And as it drags on.
As much as anything, food is a weapon of war.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Next time, interior design, 13th century style, which means mud, paint, and a fiery furnace.
Can you imagine living in a world with no electric lights?
Castles dominated the medieval landscape, and Britain has some of the finest in the world. Today, most are decaying relics, many of their secrets buried in time. Now, historian Ruth Goodman and archaeologists Tom Pinfold and Peter Ginn are turning the clock back to relearn the secrets of the medieval castle builders.
This is the ultimate in medieval technology.
The origin of our castles is distinctly French, introduced to Britain at the time of the Norman conquest of 1066.
3, 2, 1, tirez!
Here in the Burgundy region of France is Guédelon Castle, the world's biggest archaeological experiment. A 25-year project to build a castle from scratch, using the same tools, techniques, and materials available in the 13th century.
It's a lot of hard work at the coalface, because this is industry.
For the next 6 months, Ruth, Peter, and Tom will experience the daily rigors of medieval construction.
Drop down. Yep.
And everyday life.
Looking pretty good, you know.
How workers dressed and ate.
You can really smell your food, Ruth.
And the art of combat. This is the story of how to build a medieval castle. It's May, and the team have been immersed in the building works alongside Guédelon's masons.
Perfect. Oh, good.
They've learned how the castle was defended in times of war.
Every stone has to be in line because this is going to go up and up and up.
Now the team discover the surprisingly colourful world of 13th century castle interiors. And much of the material they work with will come straight from the ground.
Some of the stuff in here is ochre.
From paint to brighten the rooms,
It's hot. Look at the difference on my fingers.
to turning mud into floor tiles.
Can you imagine living in a world with no electric lights?
And they'll be rediscovering an ancient art in a midnight firing at the kiln. The medieval castles we're used to seeing today are scarred by centuries of warfare and weather erosion. Most of their original roofs, carpentry, and interior finishes have long since disappeared. But these drab walls are a far cry from how they looked in their heyday.
This is how many of us think of the interior of castles. Bare stone, echoey, damp, gritty underfoot, but that's because we're used to ruins. When they were in use back in the 13th century, they were rather different. You have to imagine tiled floors and plaster on the walls, perhaps painted, whitewashed, and then hangings of fabric over the top, filled with furniture. And that too is covered in fabrics, cushions, all sorts. An entirely different beast.
To strive for accuracy, the Guédelon project has adopted a specific historical time frame to work to. The castle is being designed and built as it would have been in the France of the 1230s and 40s, during the reign of King Louis IX. The region of Puisay in Burgundy was governed by one Jean de Toucy, a vassal to the king. In turn, de Toucy was the overlord of several other lower-ranking noblemen. And it was one of these lesser nobles who would have commissioned a castle like the one being built here at Guédelon today. It's not a grand royal castle, bristling with military might and enormous wealth, but a fortified residence of relatively modest taste and design, according to the rank and means of the imaginary Lord of Guédelon. The team, along with site administrator Sarah Preston, are exploring some of the key rooms and quarters within the castle to find out how the interiors are being dressed.
This is the castle's Great Hall. Great is the word.
So this is very much the hub of castle life. It's a dining hall, it's a banqueting, feasting hall.
I mean, this room is a statement of power and prestige, isn't it?
Absolutely, which is why it's important to bear in mind, of course, once it's finished, we won't have these bare stone walls.
The Great Hall was the political and business hub of castle life. This was where the Lord held court, receiving his tenants and listening to their concerns and grievances. With many of the social rituals of the day being held here, it was important for the interior design to show off his wealth and status to invited guests. Over the next few years, the Great Hall at Guédelon and the Great Tower adjacent to it will be dressed in the style of a 13th century lord and his lady.
So this is currently the Lord's chamber. This is where the Lord would sleep with his wife and his children. It's certainly a residential chamber. You can see that from the fireplace on the wall behind us. So it can be heated. That's not true of all the rooms in the castle.
The stone walls are rough, uneven and drafty, but they would have been dressed and painted. Peter and Tom are going to be painting and tiling some of the castle's indoor spaces, while Ruth makes paint.
So this is the storeroom.
But first, Sarah takes her to the already decorated kitchen under the Great Hall.
But eventually it will have a render applied and then a lime wash to make it much whiter and brighter. Come and have a look.
Oh, I see what you mean. I mean, that's real darkness into light, isn't it?
It makes such a difference. People aren't used to necessarily seeing the inside of castle walls rendered and lime washed, but it's made such a difference to the people who actually work in the kitchen because it's like...
It seems sort of bounce off,
turning
doesn't
on
it?
an electric light, absolutely. And I guess in terms of hygiene, it would have made a difference as well.
Definitely, really. It sort of kills anything that might be there and stops bugs getting into all the cracks and things. So you start with a really sterile surface, repaint it if you don't, whenever you need to.
I mean, obviously, so far we haven't had the time to render the inside of all the rooms. We've got other priorities at the moment, but as soon as we finished kind of the major building work, then we can get on with the job of rendering the inside, but I hope also the outside of the castle, because often the outsides of castles were also rendered and lime washed, because in terms of visibility, it just meant that your castle stood out in the landscape. So that's something that we couldn't necessarily get away with in a genuine historic monument, but here on this experimental site, that's something that we can show our visitors. The Tower of London, the White Tower, was named because it was lime washed on the outside.
The tower nearest the quarry, known as the Quarry Tower, would have been a guard room or shooting gallery. Even this would have been brightly decorated. The boys have been tasked by stonemason Fabrice Mangot with rendering the interior wall with lime mortar, the medieval equivalent of plaster.
We're going to use 2.5 buckets of sand and 1 lime and water and mix it in. What we're looking for here is the right consistency. Keep on adding a little moisture, turn it in, turn it in.
A bit more. It's okay.
Are you happy? Is that good enough?
It's good.
Yeah. Cosy workspace.
Fabrice demonstrates how a medieval wall is rendered.
Put some water.
We're not drenching it though, are we? Just dampening the stone.
If you don't put water, mortar...
it just won't stick. Right.
Okay.
Archaeological research has revealed that rendering wouldn't have been applied in several smooth layers, but with a single rough coat, using a technique similar to spreading butter.
Interesting technique, isn't it? Keeping the board close to the wall, pushing the render up.
You understand?
Shall we go first?
You want to try? Give it a go.
Let me get it wrong.
Yeah, I'm going to learn from your mistakes, my friend.
So to do a turret like this, how long do you think it would take?
2-3 days.
2-3 days.
That's 10 days for you,
For 2 masons.
At least 10 days for me.
Good luck.
We don't need it.
See you later.
As the lime mortar is relatively porous, it will draw out any dampness in the wall, and so help to preserve the masonry underneath.
It's interesting, isn't it, that we're only putting on 1 coat, that butter coat.
But this is an established practice, isn't it? You always think when you go to the ruined castles in the UK or around Europe, these bare walls are what they were looking at. However, not the case. It was a prestige thing to get a layer render up, decorate it.
Yeah, I mean, castles, majority of castles, they are just ruins, aren't they? You're coming to them very long after their lives.
The medieval manufacture of tiles for castle roofs and floor spaces was an industry in itself. So far, at Guédelon, 28,000 tiles have been created for the roof of the Great Hall building alone, a job which took 4 years to achieve. It's estimated that a total of 80,000 tiles will be needed to cover the roofs of the castle in its entirety. But as the 4 towers around the curtain wall are still under construction, tile production has now shifted from roof tiles to floor tiles. And Tom is about to discover just how laborious the process is to make just 1 tile.
Just breaking up some of this clay. We're going to use it for our tiles. Obviously not in this state. We actually need to get a lot of these impurities out. But some of the stuff in here is ochre. And ochre can actually be turned into paint. So I'm going to separate some of that out. But for now, just stack up on this clay, get it back to the Tuileries or the tile makers.
In the 11th century, many hamlets and villages in France specialized in tile production to meet increasing demand from the local nobility. And as the medieval tile trade grew, so did the strict regulations it was governed by, designed to standardize production.
Oh, that's the thing about clay, isn't it? It's not easy to work. You can feel all the muscles getting involved.
So you take some there.
In 1280, a decree from Toulouse stipulated that good tiles may only be made from well-pugged clay, well trampled underfoot, and not over-dry.
It feels nice, though. Is this good for the hands, good for the skin?
Very nice for the skin, yeah. Some people are paying for this.
Lucky us. I've always wanted soft hands.
Tom and tilemaker Émeric Guyot are now removing any twigs and stones and making the clay homogeneous and malleable.
Ah, so this hard lump here, this could be ochre.
Yes.
The ochre pigments contain colourful iron oxides and are set aside to be used for making paint. An integral feature of castle design were the toilets. They were known as Garderobe, the French word for wardrobe. Clothes would often be kept inside them because it was believed the smell of ammonia from urine kept parasites at bay. Garderobe were often built out of the castle walls to allow the waste to drop down through the hole to the ground or moat below. Guédelon keeps a wooden grill over the holes to dissuade any modern-day visitors from attempting to spend a penny.
It's a big question, isn't it, how people use garderobes? There is little bits of evidence in the earliest of the manners books, which are aimed at pages who are serving a knight, you know, hoping to become a squire, become a knight. So it's for little lads, you know. Their first job of the day, before their lord is up, is to prepare the privy. And he's told to make it extremely clean. He's got to sweep it out and make it clean. He's also got to put cloths in there. Not quite sure how the cloths were used, but they're to go in there. And sweet-smelling herbs.
Yeah.
So that it's somewhere comfortable and pleasant to be. So at least for those at the very top of society, going to the toilet ought to have been
quite a nice experience. Yeah, I think, I mean, it wouldn't have smelled too bad. I mean, I know the poo's going down, and yes, if it's not getting moved, there might be a bit of wafting up. But those herbs would certainly have taken the edge off.
And there is, of course, the question of toilet paper.
There is. I mean, many people think leaves and moss, but let's face it, deforestation.
Where the heck are you going to get a leaf of the right size in the middle of January? I mean, honestly. And then also you think, well, moss, but you'd have to have moss plantations, wouldn't you, to keep a big community going?
It gets very, very dry in summer.
So, I mean, there's nothing to say that people didn't use. I mean, you know as well as I do that archaeologically all sorts of things turn up in cesspits. Yeah. So probably people used whatever was to hand. But I do wonder if maybe the more normal system, especially in a castle, would have been to have your own cloth or rag or flannel to wash yourself with.
Or even a communal rag.
Quite possibly.
Washed out in a bucket.
Washed out in a bucket. It's perfectly possible.
For these privies, well, certainly use a coat of render, coat of lime wash, probably a loose seats.
I think a door might be a good idea too.
And a door.
So you have to take some, this thing is grease is dripping. You have to take it on your finger like this, and that's for cake. You put it inside.
Just work that around. And that's to actually lubricate the side of the template, is it?
Yes.
So the tile will come out easily at the end.
So I like to start with hand because you can feel all the corners. It's very important to have good corners in a tile. If not, the masons are really not satisfied to work. It's very hard for them.
We don't want to upset the masons.
No, don't do that. So you can use this as well.
Right,
when you think the corners are okay, you can just finish with.
Right, so. But you're not just hitting it, are you? Sort of looks like you're rolling a bit there.
Yeah, a little bit. If you like doing like this.
Right, okay.
You see.
So it's almost like you're twisting it off as you make contact. That's what's happening with you. With me, it's kind of in between, I think.
New tool.
New tool.
You use this one like this and try to get something very flat. So we have to see if it's okay on the other side. When there's a problem, it's always with the corners, always something with the corners.
Okay,
so we have to check the corners. Okay, my corners are good.
What do you think?
This is perfect.
Oh,
This
yeah?
is very good. Yes, yes. Masons will be happy. Okay, you put it there and you do like this. With the grease spoke, normally it's going. But you have to sign with the name of this place.
And basically that's like quality control.
Yes.
And if we've done once, we've got another 69 to do.
Yes. Go back to work.
Just beyond the castle walls, Ruth is visiting Guédelon's paint house to discover how the ochre found in the quarry and in the clay is used to make pigments for paint.
I'm going to start by grinding down the earths.
Valérie Heurtaud is a ceramicist by trade from a family of local potters. She's in charge of pigments, paint making and decoration at Guédelon.
Oh, right. So these are the pieces that Tom was finding in amongst the clay when he was doing the tiling.
Donc on ne sait pas la couleur de la pierre. La couleur qu'il y a dans la pierre, on ne la connaît pas.
Paint's funny stuff. It's not the same as dye. Dye stains the fibres of what you're dyeing. So if you get a wood stain, that is a dye for wood. Because it's dyeing the wood fibres in the same way as cloth is a dye that stains the fibres. Paint is different. Paint is bits of coloured stuff that are glued onto a surface. And so if they're very big lumps, the amount of light coming off is quite small, the colour looks patchy and thin. If you can make the particles very, very tiny, the light will refract off them in a great burst and you'll get a really strong, intense colour. I mean, I shouldn't think a 13th century person thought about light refraction, but they did know that if you grind it thoroughly, you get a much better paint. It's not a bad colour, is it? Look good against the yellow. I've got the yellow still on there.
Yellow ochre is the other key colour found in the natural Guédelon environment.
Tout à l'heure, je l'aurais pas dû dire, mais c'est pas grave. Donc on mélange.
This really is the colour of Guédelon.
Oui.
Look at that. When you're around here, everything's this colour, absolutely everything. That is the dust that we breathe in whenever you go anywhere near the castle. It's what grinds underfoot. It's the, you know, just look at the place. This is the colour of the ground. So having sort of crushed it up a bit and dissolved it, we're now sieving it. We want small particles.
As the mixture settles, the heavier ochre particles fall to the bottom, and the remaining liquid is left out in the sun to dry. The finer particles left behind are then ground down into a powder.
It's an enormous amount of work to grind this down to the fineness that you need, but when you just see the range of colours that have been produced just out of the earth of Guédelon, you can see why people would bother. Just look at it.
Out in the castle courtyard, Peter and Philippe Delage, known to his fellow craftspeople as Gandalf, are mixing lime wash, made with 1 part lime and 1 part water.
What is that in French, lime wash?
Lait de chaux.
Lait de chaux? Oh, milk of lime. How can you tell it's good consistency? There's more on the
Oh, it's really good.
Is that's good? Yeah, that's good.
Oh, should be enough. Yeah.
I'll grab that bucket.
Yes. Come on.
Up the tower.
Peter heads towards the Lord and Lady's bedchamber in the Great Tower. to brighten things up in the Garderobe.
Right, left, English, French, à droite, à gauche. And then it's down, down, down. And it just gives a beautiful, beautiful texture. I know at Guédelon there was a massive debate as to whether, you know, they should leave the stones, the walls bare, because all this work had gone in by the masons to put the stone there. And they say if you cover it up with mortar, with render, and paint it with lime wash, the public won't see it. But this is how the castles were in the medieval age. Of course, as we come across castles, they're ruins generally. Very little plasterwork survives.
Ruth and Valerie experiment with a bit of 13th century chemistry.
So this is the local yellow ochre earth.
Oui, oui.
And we're cooking it.
Parce qu'il va devenir rouge.
Because we're trying to turn it red.
Oui.
It's quite exciting, isn't it, that this just comes out of the ground all yellow. And you can get this range of colours.
Là, il est déjà en train de changer de couleur.
Oh, yes.
Sur le bord.
Yes, you're right. I can see. There, where it's hot. Look at the difference on my fingers.
Yellow ochre is a hydrated iron oxide, known as limonite. As it's heated over the fire, some of the limonite turns into hematite, turning the ochre into rich, darker shades, such as burnt sienna and burnt umber.
Pigments like this are really ancient. Right across Europe, if you think of those cave paintings right at the dawn of human history, this is the sort of paint that they were using to make them. And if you think of Britain, the Picts, those people are known or described in the ancient Roman texts as being covered in red paint, the red men, and the Irish talk about it too. It seems to have been a really Celtic thing to do, to paint yourself in red and yellow ochres.
Vraiment rouge.
Oh, look at that.
Just beyond the castle walls at Guédelon, the earthen kiln used for the firing of tiles is lined with bricks. Kilns were often owned by the local lord, who of course charged his tenants for using them. In the 13th century, regulations governing the work of local tilers in and around Toulouse specified not only the consistency and dimensions of the tiles themselves, but also the size of the kilns used and the number of tiles permitted to be fired in any one firing. Guédelon fires 4,000 tiles at a time. Bruno Feval is the chief tile maker at Guédelon, and he and his team have presided over 15 experimental firings during the past 9 years. Each firing has enabled them to improve and finesse their techniques.
The way they're placing them in the kiln, they're leaving gaps so that when they fire this, the flames can work their way up through every single tile and hopefully with an even temperature, making each one hard, each one a very similar colour, and making sure there's no losses. And one of the problems with these tiles, when you dry them out, if there's any water in there and you fire it too quickly, the kiln, that water will expand because it will turn into a gas. It will blow the tile apart. You'll hear a pop. And if these are stacked incorrectly, if one tile goes, several tiles could go. They've been doing this for a number of years. They know what they're doing. A lot of this is trial and error. Experimental archaeology. They know what these kilns look like from excavations that have been done in the UK, that have been done in France. Now they know how these kilns actually work because they've been working these kilns.
Out in the peace and quiet of the forest, Ruth is making an essential tool for applying her medieval paint.
So if I'm actually going to be able to paint anything that looks like something, I'm going to need a decent brush to do it with. So I went and found some badger hair. Well, I'll be honest, there was some roadkill, so I shaved it. I know it sounds a bit of a weird thing to do. So I shaved it as close to the skin as I possibly could in order to keep the hairs all as they grow naturally in order. So when I sort of grab a little tuft of it here, if I sort of try and separate a bit out, and what I want are these long, straight hairs that are what helps a badger shed water. The hair is designed to move water, which is why it makes such great brushes. I'm going to glue those hairs in place so they don't move during the next bit of the process.
The glue Ruth is using is gum arabic, hardened sap from the acacia tree, mixed with 4 parts water.
Gum arabic, of course, is water-soluble, so I'll be able to just wash it out of the brush at the end. And can you see how that's coming together now as a point? That's exactly what I want it to do as a finished brush. If you look at a modern paintbrush, there's a sort of metal bit between the hairs and the stick. The 13th century, you're not going to mess around trying to make a metal ferrule. You just do something much, much easier and cheaper. You go and get yourself a feather. Because if you think about it, if I cut that bit off and I cut that bit off, I've got a ready-made tube. I can take a little bit of thread and bind my hairs. Just whipping them into place. As tight as I can manage. And I've got a nice, firmly held little paintbrush head, which I should be able to poke through. There we go. You can see how firmly that's in there now. See? Paintbrush head. All I need now is jam a stick in the other end. Done. That looks like it'll work, doesn't it?
The pressure's on at the tile kiln. The 13th of May in medieval France was regarded as the Day of the Holy Ice. It was believed to be the last day of spring in which a hailstorm would occur, sent by God as a sign of his omnipotence before the arrival of summer. And as hail often turns quickly to heavy rain, that could have disastrous consequences for the fate of this batch of tiles. This firing has already been held up for several days, owing to heavy storms. And once again, dark clouds are looming overhead.
The rain is coming, and we've just got to get this finished, because if these tiles get wet, it'll be a serious problem. Not only can it affect their ability to fire, essentially they may explode if the water gets in there. It'll also take an awful lot more fuel to dry this kiln out and then get it up to temperature.
Medieval tile makers would probably have used mud, earth or wooden boards to weatherproof the tops of their kilns. But for reasons of practicality and efficiency, Guédelon relies on sheets of 21st century corrugated iron. There isn't a moment to lose.
Here it comes, the holy ice. The hail. The last time of the year you'll get hail, and almost as if on cue.
As feared, the hail quickly turns into a downpour. The kiln will remain covered for several days to allow the soil around it and the wood required for firing time to thoroughly dry out. Only once Bruno has assessed that the ground and climate conditions are optimum will the firing finally take place.
Good work, Peter, good work.
And at this rate, it may have to be postponed for several more days yet.
Glad I've got a poncho, Tomo.
While the tile firing is on hold, progress is made on the chapel tower. The guard room within the lower floor is undergoing a colourful transformation. Valerie and her colleague Aurélie Paillard are using the Guédelon ochre to paint a design on the walls, known as fictive masonry. This was a popular style of artwork among the nobility and royalty throughout Europe in the mid-13th century. It was a less expensive way to create the illusion of the walls having been constructed from expensive white limestone. By lime washing the cheaper sandstone white, and then overpainting this with a colourful fake stonework pattern, a look of grandeur and of wealth was created.
Transformation of this room is incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, to think it goes from bare stone to render to lime wash to this. I mean, this is prestige, isn't it? In 1240, the Queen of England had something very similar in her bedchambers with the addition of flowers. But yeah, it brightens the room, doesn't it? It's like visual, it's impressive.
Yeah. And these fake joints made out of this ochre paint give the impression of highly cut stone.
Exactly. It's like you are replicating what's beneath it, but in a very stylish way, in a way that actually says to people coming here to visit, this is what I'm worth, I've got money, I can make this happen.
The ochre pigments would be mixed with a glue binder made from egg, or sometimes rabbit skin, to make the paint.
I'm not sure if my lines are dark enough. Uh-oh. I think I top-loaded my brush a little bit too much there. It hasn't run. That's the danger, isn't it? Too much pigment on your brush.
Yeah, do you want to touch up that bit there, and then I'll nip in there?
No, it's all going wrong. It's going wrong. It's looking awful. Hideous. Yeah.
Hell, I've seen worse.
Well, I know, but, you know, you should put yourself down. Oh, no.
En plus,
Every aspect of Guédelon's design is planned by a scientific committee of experts. They work closely with the staff so that every feature is based on authentic primary sources of historical evidence. And just a few miles away, in the village of Moutier, is a key example of that evidence. The Church of St. Peter, built around the year 1000. The Church of the Middle Ages was a huge and wealthy landowner, which exerted a powerful influence over people's lives. And the interiors of its buildings often set a benchmark for the tastes and trends of the era. In the early 1980s, the white distemper covering the interior walls started to crack and peel,
This is amazing.
uncovering a fascinating medieval secret.
Everywhere.
A painstaking conservation over the next 10 years revealed these stunning ochre murals from the 13th century. They've provided Guédelon with an authentic and illuminating resource from which to draw inspiration for the interior decor of the castle.
This is the panel that we're particularly interested in terms of the work we're doing at Guédelon. Right. It's amazing. You can pick out there, you can see the frieze.
Yeah.
And these 5-petal flowers, you find these all over the place. Very pop art, but it's pure 13th century. Of course, the church would have been absolutely central in people's lives. Everyone locally would have had to have come to this church. So the paintings on these walls aren't just decoration. They are here to tell stories. They can be read very much like a cartoon strip.
Right. It's almost the entertainment of the age. The biblical story just laid out in scenes.
And I like the way that the artists have also taken the opportunity to retell the story in their way. If there was any kind of friction between them and the church, look, we've got Eve here, sashaying away, being very cheeky, giving the wink to Adam, just behind here.
They have a wink. We can't see what happens behind the pillar, and then afterwards they've got a harvest and a child. So
I wonder what the reaction was, because presumably the villagers would be in on the joke. Only we knew.
Ruth is applying some of the techniques discovered at the Church of St. Peter to the bedchamber, which would have been used to provide hospitality to the Lord and Lady's most distinguished guests. It's the most highly decorated room in the castle so far, and Ruth is using the burnt red ochre paint to restore the rose motifs in the window seat.
Obviously, the domestic spaces within a castle are intended to impress. They have to look gorgeous. It's about the look of the place as much as anything else. And naturally, people painted their walls. It's not a church. This isn't about religious storytelling. This was about showing your power. It was about prestige. That up there, that little bit where it's painted to look as if it's masonry, with the little roses in front, often called stones and roses, is perhaps the most typical, as far as we can tell, of all interior decorating designs of the mid-13th century. That is what the Queen of England had on her bedroom walls in the Tower of London. Stones and roses, the very height of fashion.
Back at the Church of St. Peter in Moutier, Sarah explains how the paintings on these walls have informed the way in which Guédelon's interiors are decorated.
And because we don't have a lot of evidence of the types of paintings that were inside castles, we were always very careful to say to people, okay, we don't know if there was ever a bedroom painted in exactly the style that we've got at the castle, but just a stone's throw from the castle, at the same time, we're painting these same patterns, and crucially, it's the same colour palette. This is just like walking out of the quarry, isn't it? We've got the red ochre, the yellow ochres, the browns.
I have to say, I mean, you look at the masons when they come out of the quarry and that kind of, the dust and the ochre that's on them, that is your colour palette.
Absolutely. No, everything's there. So if we wanted to paint in this area with blues or greens, we'd have to buy those pigments in from further afield, and they would have been more costly. And it's interesting to see that in a church, the decision has obviously been taken not to have too much blue or green. They've used the materials that were available locally.
Artwork like this just doesn't really survive in castles. Castles are generally ruins, but churches, they're such an important historical reference.
No, that was certainly a challenge for us, in that we were aware that there are very few models of the types of paintings that there would have been inside castles at this time. It was a very deliberate decision not to use the human figures, because obviously these are depicting biblical stories. So we stuck very much with the flowers, the trees, the geometric shapes. But what we're wanting to do is offer people a vision of what a 13th century visitor might have seen, and to get over the fact that the castles weren't bare stone, empty places. They were decorated and they were full of colour.
Another area of the castle, which is the result of intense research into 13th century architecture, is the chapel. Clément Girard, the chief stone carver at Guédelon, is a highly experienced draftsman, but he's about to undertake his most ambitious project to date.
Right now, Clement's doing the drawing for what will be the prestige feature of the chapel. So much so, they've actually imported a slightly less hard type of limestone that will be easier to carve. This really is precise work. I am marvelling at the skill he's got.
Clement is designing a decorative piece of masonry based on a very common 13th century design found throughout France. It's a niche for the chapel wall, with a trefoil-shaped head, which will sit upon pillars, rising from two small basins called piscines. At Guédelon, white dressed limestone is used for the more decorative features of the castle. Although it's quicker to dress than the quarry's hard sandstone, it's easier to chip, so great precision is required, and mistakes could prove costly. Finally, it's the morning of the long-awaited firing of the kiln. Peter's up early to help share the workload with Florian Dubois. The firebox in the lower chamber has been stacked with logs and twigs. And at last, the first piece of kindling is lit. Within seconds, clouds of wood smoke are billowing out at the top of the firing chamber. It's going to take hundreds of armfuls of wood and many hours of careful monitoring to turn these flames into the roaring blaze required to fire the tiles. A long, hot, and exhausting day lies ahead. The stone carvers have completed the first part of the white limestone niche and are ready to transport it to the chapel tower. The hoisting of the stone requires care and attention. The Lord, and all of those working for him, would have set great store by this sacred work of art.
Well, for us, the significance is that this is the first real piece of religious architecture that we've got in the castle. This is the only sacred space within the castle. So we're actually standing here in the area where the altar will be. So this is the holiest place of this sacred space.
Where you'd have the holy water and the oils, yeah.
So this is the most delicate sculpture that we've done here. As you can see, it's a hand basin. You've seen it being dressed earlier, but you can see the two dips. Now, we had some priests visiting because we were wondering ourselves why there were these two kind of recesses. And the priests that were visiting suggested that maybe one was for washing priests' hands before the Mass, and that the other one was then for washing the implements that had been used in the Mass.
Right.
What we've been told, at least, is that the idea is that all the water that is in this piscina, this hand basin, is holy water, and as such, it can't just be thrown away. All the water will actually, and we're not talking about huge amounts, but the water will just kind of filter down into the wall and stay within the walls of the chapel.
So the stone of the chapel itself is obviously porous. It's going to absorb that holy water and essentially make this whole space even more sacred.
That's the idea. So our mini little temple here at Guédelon. So it's been an opportunity, obviously, for the stonemasons to use different techniques. And then there was a little bit of improvisation that gave the stonemasons an opportunity to kind of have a bit of freedom of movement. You can see each column is slightly different. This is Mathieu's. You can see his mark up here on the stone. And on the other side, we've got Jean-Paul's right here.
The mason's marks on dressed stones are a permanent reminder of the ancient skills and techniques of the medieval masons. Each one presents us with a unique signature of the craftsman who carved a particular piece. At the kiln, tension is rising. A month's rain has taken its toll, and the firing is not going to plan.
Everything got wet, the kiln got wet, the wood got wet. So it's just taken that a little bit longer to dry everything out, get rid of the moisture.
The blaze is still several hundred degrees below what it needs to be. Peter leads a frantic effort to try to save the 4,000 tiles inside. We know today the optimum temperature for successful firing is around 1,000 degrees centigrade. 13th century tilers relied on their experience, their senses, and costly trial and error. They would have been under intense pressure to get firings right.
The kiln, it's just about getting up to temperature now. Ready to really feed up, and pretty soon those tiles will be getting close to firing. But it does mean it's going to be a longer day. I mean, the sun is setting in the sky. We're going to go late into the night.
A tiler's trade depended on the local nobility's trust and the reliability of his product. And the strict laws governing the standards of production were rigidly enforced. Tiles must be correctly stacked. The temperature must not be too high or too low. The heat must be distributed evenly throughout the kiln. If not, the results could be underfired, overfired, or otherwise damaged tiles. And a medieval lord would neither accept nor pay for a single substandard tile. Failed firing had serious consequences for a tiler's livelihood. As darkness falls, Peter and the team finally succeed in getting the temperature up to 1,000 degrees centigrade.
We've been working since this morning without stopping, and now we are a bit tired. It was hard, but now it's at a good temperature.
Right. And what sort of colours are you looking for in there?
It must stay orange. If it's white, it's too much. If you want the tiles to be fired evenly, we must stay at this temperature during 2 hours.
Oh, right, okay. But are you happy, Sybil?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, we are. Yes, it's a dream.
Yeah. Can you imagine living in a world with no electric lights? I mean, tonight we have the stars, we have the moon, and we have the tile kiln. 4,000 tiles. They're just about to block this up with wood, and they're going to seal it in. It's a lot of hard work at the coalface, because this is industry. Could you imagine what it must have been like to see a castle being built of stone, surrounded by these kilns that were firing flames into that night sky? But sat back here, thinking about perhaps the hell down there, and the heavens up there, and your tiles currently in purgatory. Which way are they going to go? Have you been good? Will they be used in that castle? Who knows?
It takes several days for the kiln to cool down. Peter's helping to unload the tiles and examine the results.
Même seulement regarde, en les frottant, il n'y a pas de souci. Ouais. Tac, ça c'est beau.
You can hear this?
Yeah, I
it's
can hear
really
that.
like this sound is perfect for us.
That ringing sound is what you're looking for.
Hey, perfect sounds.
Ah, it's a good sound.
So,
why are you guys spitting on the tiles?
Oh, to see to see if it's cooked. Because sometimes the sound is not enough.
Right.
The sound can be at the middle. We don't know if it's raw or cooked. So we can spit on it, and if the saliva stays there, it's cooked. If it's going inside, it's not.
Every single tile coming out of this kiln, you're quality controlling them. You're listening to sound.
Yes.
If you're unsure, you spit on it. If it goes in,
Yeah.
it's
We can't
undercooked.
spit on everyone. 4,000. We don't have enough.
But what happens if they overcook?
We have an example. So it was not for this firing. It was for one before. Yeah. When overcooked, it's going like that. So we have this bubble of gas inside, and the bubble is growing bigger, and the tile will burst with time. And this is good quality, handmade.
Well, I saw how hard you guys worked and how long it takes to make these tiles. I mean, it's good. I'm pleased. I'm happy for you. You know?
We're happy too. Especially with this firing, we're really happy. Yes, we have very good results. It's really nice to have it.
The fired tiles are now used to floor the fully rendered and lime-washed quarry tower. It will take thousands more tiles and several more years of rendering, lime washing and painting before the entire castle finally looks like it might have done in the 13th century.
This is really starting to look like a finished castle, isn't it? You know, with the tiles and the walls all plastered and painted. It's starting to get that feel of a living space.
I'll be honest, I did not appreciate how much work and effort it would take to get this stage actually happening. You know, clay for the tiles, finding the paint. But when you see it, it's unbelievable.
And I really can't wait. I know it's a long time in the future yet, but for the furniture and the furnishings, for the textiles to finally arrive.
Well, it emphasises that it's actually a living space and not just a defensive building, doesn't it? And in moments like this, you look at this, you know, yes, I could actually sit here and relax.
Yeah.
It's not all about warfare when it comes to castles.
Yeah. This is an entertaining space. Next to the Great Hall, you can bring your more select guests in here to wine them and dine them, and perhaps a guest bed in here, and everybody else sleeping around on mats. You can get the feel for that sort of convivial way of life.
I have to say, though, the medieval period is far more colourful than I thought it was.
Next time, the community of skills it takes to build a castle. From the blacksmith transforming metal to the never-ending need for wood. Plus, making a medieval water mill.
Wow, is all I can say.